Special meeting of the Common Council, City of Oneonta, March 15th, 2022. Call to order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Dennett.
Here.
Councilmember Murphy.
Here.
Councilmember Davies.
Here.
Councilmember Risberger.
Here.
Councilmember LaCarche. Councilmember Carson.
Here.
Councilmember Harrington.
Here.
Councilmember Raptor.
Here.
Councilmember Falco. Present.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're here to hear an appeal of the decision made by the City Board of Examining Electricians.
If you'd like me, I'd like to make a preliminary statement to orient the council. The council has never done an appeal like this before.
Okay.
So I wanted to lay some ground rules out so they understand where we're coming from and what the statute says. Under our electrical code, there's an opportunity for the electrical board to revoke licenses. That's section 112 of the code. The same provision allows for anyone who feels aggrieved by the decision of the board to come in front of the common council and appeal that decision. This is not a new hearing. Evidence will not be taken. We're not making a determination as to whether or not the electrical board, the value of their determinations. They made their decision. The appellant is here to appeal that decision, saying that the board did something wrong or did something unfair. That's what they're here for. We're not saying that the electoral board didn't do their job. It's not a new opportunity to raise new issues. It's not a new opportunity to decide whether the information that was given to the board was correct or not, but whether they interpreted it correctly, whether they followed the law or they didn't follow the law. The appellant has an opportunity through his counsel to speak, to say whatever they wish to say about why the electoral board made their decision improperly. You will have an opportunity to ask them and the appellant through them if you have questions. We also have Mark Hogue, who's the co-chairman of the electoral board here. We also have Stephen Yearley here. So they will be available for questioning as well. If when they're done, then Stephen and or co-chair can state what the position of the electoral board was, and you can ask questions of them. After that, if the appellant wants to raise issues based on what was said, they can do that. So we'll go back and forth. But remember, this is not a trial. This is not a new hearing. This is not a second bite of the apple. This is to make a determination of what the electoral board did or did not correctly do their job. Okay.
Clarification, at the end of these discussions, the back and forth of them, the council will vote.
We have 60 days to make a decision.
I see.
You can,
This is for information.
you can do it tonight if you want. You don't have to do it tonight, but that's up to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, council members. As you know, it's an appeal from a termination, a death sentence or a death penalty imposed by the Board of Electrical Examiners. Under your code, your city code, they do have the authority to do that, but only in very limited circumstances. So let me just take a minute and read to you some sentences or two from the code. If upon a hearing by the Board of Electrical Examiners of all evidence offered, it shall be decided by the Board of Electrical Examiners that said holder of a license has willfully violated any of the provisions of any state law or the state building construction code, which of course is now the New York State Fire Prevention Code, Fire Prevention Building Code, or has proved his or her incompetence to comply with those rules. But the key word there is willfully, and that the code violation must be in connection with electrical work. If Mr. DeSanto speeds in Oneonta or violates your city noise ordinance, the electrical board cannot pull his electrical license. He has to do something wrong in his electrical work. We believe that there are two reasons that this board should reverse the decision of Mr. DeSanto's license. First, there was no substantial evidence of any of the violations asserted. There was colloquy, there was back and forth about whether it was one or two outlets that were miswired or three outlets that were miswired. And the standard for you to review, an agency decision is twofold. You must decide if there was substantial evidence, and you must decide if the ruling was arbitrary and capricious. Normally, the arbitrary and capricious standard applies to the punishment. Did the punishment suit the crime? And we believe that, one, there's not any facts or evidence showing willful violations, which is a requirement, and we do believe that the death penalty was not warranted, even if they were proven. Now, I did see, and I just want to comment, somebody handed me pictures and photographs, and I don't know if this is intended to be evidence. I've never seen them before. I've kind of requested copies, but Mr. Mercer said he's never seen them either. So I don't know what the function is there, but it's a little bit of a surprise. Because I had requested, I think Mr. Mercer will agree, copies of all photographs and records that might back up the committee's finding. Now, let's look at the code violations. The committee was concerned about violations on two jobs of Mr. DeSanto did. One on Maple Street, the city of Oneonta, the other on Center Street. In the Center Street job, Mr. DeSanto's practice, he had hired an apprentice. He had an apprentice do some work. Then he would go, as a master electrician, follow the apprentice and do a walkthrough to make sure all the work was done properly. Remember, this is in the spring of 2021, height of the pandemic. So one job that the apprentice finishes, Mr. DeSanto goes over to inspect it, and the building was locked. He could not get in. So he called the building manager, who said he would call him back, or left a message, and the building manager did not call him back for a few weeks. And he called him back at the same time he called the inspector. So the inspector arrived before Mr. DeSanto did. So the inspector went through the job before he did his walkthrough and corrected what the apprentice did. And the inspector found 3 miswired outlets. Mr. DeSanto, he's done the walkthrough first, would have found the ease with which you identify a miswired outlet. You should just plug in, and it lights up and tells you what the problem is. But he didn't get a chance to do that. And Mr. DeSanto acknowledges that if that were indeed a violation, which because of the timing, one would challenge that, it was correctable and not warrant a death penalty. Put the man out of work. And I understand that we have a communication from the building manager that confirms that timing of events. Is that correct?
Yes.
Let's look at the,
Counsel, if I can interrupt for just a second. If you continue to testify about the facts of the case,
Yes.
and bring that to the attention of the council, and argue based on the facts of the case, then I think I should make it clear to you that you're opening the door to having other people, having me or the code enforcement officer testifying as to the underlying facts of the case.
I am reciting, my facts are all based on what I heard on the video recorded meeting. The only thing I've introduced new is that we have the representative from the building manager. At the hearing, Mr. DeSanto offered that. That's all I'm adding to this. This is all facts as elicited from the video recording.
Okay, as long as it's clear that what you're doing is that you're simply reciting.
I'm not I wasn't
You're
there.
reciting what was already on the video, because they've seen the video. They know what admissions he made
Okay.
on the video.
Okay. So there was another question of electrical work violation having to do with a GFI outlet that was not tamper-proof. Mr. DeSanto acknowledged that fact and ascribed it at the meeting, this is not evidence from me, that it was a supply chain problem. Again, during the height of the pandemic, during the height of supply chain issues throughout the country. The committee also expressed concern about Mr. DeSanto's license renewal application submitted in January 18th of 2021, in which he said he had no employees, which was accurate and true at the time he filed it. 3 months later, he hired an apprentice. He went back to City Hall in an effort to update his license record. It was closed, and he acknowledged that it just slipped off his table after that. After all, he's an electrician, he's not a lawyer, he's not following up on paperwork. I should tell you, at about this time, the governor of the state of New York declared a disaster emergency throughout the state and suspended and delayed all kinds of filings and renewals. Hundreds of different filing requirements were suspended on account of the pandemic and the difficulty of communicating and access to buildings. So here we have this committee considering Mr. DeSanto's failure to update his record when the entire country, maybe even the world, is on official filing hiatus. We recognize it's true, but the death penalty put the man out of work. Heaven's sakes, the IRS didn't make us file our taxes on April 15th. We just feel that the assertions against him are questionable, but even if proven, it doesn't merit putting the man out of work. He's got 25 or almost 25 years experience in the electrical business. He's a professional man. He's had no problems in the past. So I respectfully say that the rescission of the license should be reversed. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Mark, you want to, or Steve, you want to speak to this?
Yeah, you do what you want.
I mean, this is, as far as the code enforcement office is concerned, like, we are only administratively involved in the licensing process. So we do not do electrical inspections. We're only involved minimally with the processing of permits. Other than that, it's mostly up to the electrical board to make determinations about licensure, issuing them and revoking them. So short of that, I mean, the only section, I would argue that the section of code that was quoted left out sections about revocation due to failure to follow local ordinances. And I think it's actually written on the license application. So I think the argument that the code does not include revocation of license for violating local ordinances is incorrect. But outside of that, I really don't have that much of an opinion.
I acknowledge that's true. I thought I included local law. I mean, I read this, but again, willful violations, that's the key word, willful.
Thank you. Mark?
Mr. Mayor, it was more than just 2 violations, there was multiple. The code, and that's part of that information you have, says that if there is any alterations to circuits, they will have an arc fault breaker or an arc fault device on there, which was another violation, which was not done, which would have picked up said problem, and there was multiple. And this gentleman was educated on this in the summer on 58 Maple Street, because that was one of the issues there, and we went over the code and things that had to be done, and that the breaker, or the new outlet that was added was not GFI protected, and it had to be tamper resistant, which was not, amongst a few other things. With that, the board did give him the opportunity to sit, it was not a death sentence, as the council said, to sit for the City of Oneonta electrical test, because he took a test in another town that reciprocated with us. And after doing some research, this has been a reciprocation for many years, predating me. When the board did some research, we found that the test that was given in that municipality is not nearly equivalent to our test. So that was an opportunity that was given to him, that his license was revoked, and he may sit for the next test that's given for the city.
Do you have anything?
Yes, I would just say that the reciprocal license is something that's mandated by the legislature, and it's not for the committee to decide they don't like it. If the legislature decides they don't want to recognize a reciprocal license, that's another issue. But Mr. Hogan's committee are not authorized to revoke somebody's license because they don't like the program in Greene County.
If I could follow up on that, does your DeSanto have a license, an electrical license in Cooperstown where his office is?
I do not believe there's a license requirement in Cooperstown.
So he can work in Cooperstown anytime he wants?
I believe he can.
Okay, and he can work in the town of Oneonta?
Yes, he can.
Can he work in Greene where the original license was issued?
Yes, he can.
So there's no place else that he can't work other than the city of Oneonta?
Correct.
So he wouldn't be dead if he could work anywhere else in the county, including Cooperstown, and including Greene, isn't that true?
It's the death sentence in the city of Oneonta, yes.
Okay, but he can take the new, even assuming that what happened is correct, he could take the licensing in June.
In 6 months, that's
May, April,
we
May,
attempted
June.
to,
That's 3 months.
No,
But your license was revoked in December, so that's 6 months, that's a 6-month holding period.
Okay, but the reason we're here today is because there was a request for adjournment, correct?
is,
I mean, part of the adjournment is the period of time that was requested to adjourn.
our request here is that the rescission be reversed.
No, I get
If the city wants to change its rules and require Mr. DeSanto to take its test, that's perfectly fine, but right now, he complied with the requirements to get a City of Oneonta license, and there's no substantial evidence that he willfully did anything that should deprive him of that.
Well, he swore that he had no apprentices, correct?
And that was correct when he swore it.
Okay, and now, when he hired the apprentice,
Yes, in March.
New York state law required him to have unemployment insurance and workers' compensation benefits on him, yes?
I don't know.
You don't know whether New York state requires workers' compensation?
Well, I think it does. I think it's a
Yeah.
general rule it does. I think it's a general
And when-
rule it
and
does.
when did-
But I don't know
when
that
did
the
you
electrical
require that
board, listen, I have,
Under COVID, if his employee had been injured, he wouldn't have gotten any benefits at all because he was not covered, correct?
well, we don't
Or
know.
not.
We don't know that because of the various rulings emanating from state agencies regarding the needs to file. But there's no evidence he did not have workers' compensation before this committee, nor was it before his committee.
Yeah, but he swore that he would have it, that he'd comply with all the laws.
He did when he filed in January 18th.
So
He did, and
as
that's
long
true.
as we didn't catch him, it was gonna be okay.
No, It was true when he filed.
Now, does he have insurance coverage on his?
Well, he doesn't do any work in this county, in this city.
Well-
So what he complies with the rules
He
of,
does the workers' comp currently.
he does, I'm told. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. But the issue is, he filed the document in January, and it was truthful, correct, and accurate, and violated nothing. And if you read the regulations carefully, it's very hard to extract therefrom any obligation to update that application. There just is nothing in there that says, it talks about cards, but there's nothing that says a master electrician shall update his license when he hires an employee.
He swears to comply with all the laws of the city of
Right,
Oneonta.
right.
And not having coverage is a violation of that, correct?
I don't know. I don't think
If
that's
he
a
swears-
violation of
if
the
he
county,
swears he's gonna
of the
do
city
something,
law. It's a violation
If
of
he
the,
swears he's gonna do something and then doesn't do it, is that a violation of his sworn statement?
you know, in a vacuum it is, but I don't know. He swore to the truth of the situation when he filed, and he agreed to comply with the laws of the city of Oneonta. He may have violated the workers' comp law for a period of time, but I don't think that has to do with his electrical work. That's for the workers' comp, and they're very capable of knocking on his door and finding out if he did or did not have workers' comp. I don't think that's Mr. Hoag's responsibility.
So on that note, Mr. Hoag, do you have rebuttal to that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, on his defense that he was not able to follow up after his employee, he could have called to cancel the inspection or reschedule, which was never done. We were never notified that anybody had not been in there other than himself, till later on, when he came to the meeting and said that it was one of his employees. There was nobody said that there was other employees or anybody else other than himself. When we discussed the Maple Street, he had said that he had done that entire project, that there was several deficiencies in. The electrical board holds the electricians and their employees to a standard. There is a perceived notion that you hire an electrician, whether it's in a city or an area that requires a license or not, that they have a certain level of knowledge and education. And when something as simple as this, and it's a major safety factor that is in the National Electric Code, is not adhered to, that shows the board that there's a problem. Whether it's an employee that he's not following up on or his workmanship is not to the code, it's a safety. That was the whole point of having the board put in place.
I'd like to entertain questions from the council. Anyone has a question? Lynn?
So, Mr. Hoag, what is the thought process, or is it all or nothing on the licensing? When the inspection has deficiencies and that is brought to the board, what's your selection process for judgment?
So generally, it is the level of severity and the number of times there's been an issue. Like I said, I spoke with a gentleman about issues at Maple Street, explained everything. I said, when you change devices, the code requires arc fault protection be put in. They were not. You add outlets in a kitchen, they have to be tamper resistant and ground fault protected. They were not, amongst some other things. These are all simple things that a master electrician or a journeyman should know. This is basic, like first year kind of stuff. Safety issues. When you wire somebody's outlets, multiples, half the house, a portion of the house, that's a safety issue. And if there are fault breakers that were required to be there or receptacles, they would have tripped. So as to whether something was plugged in would have caused the fire, luckily it didn't. It's hard to say whether it would or not, but it's not correct to the manufacturer specifications or the National Electric Code. So, this was the second problem, and it was, his defense was it was an employee, it's an employee, and it's an employee. It doesn't matter if it's an employee. When you have a license or you're in an area it's not a license, there's no statute of limitations on workmanship in the state of New York on electric work, unless something's changed in the last year or so. So if you do something incorrectly now, you could be held to it down the road 10 years, if it's proven that you did it. So that's what we look at, and in this case, this is the second offense. And it's not extremely complicated. This is everyday, simple stuff, residential code stuff that he should have correct, or his employee should have correct. And if he's going behind him, then, he should have been there and said, or called and canceled, and didn't. But if you're sending somebody out working by themselves, and they can't get the simple stuff, that's where, the board has concern.
Councilmember Carson with a follow-up.
Yeah, I'm
So,
sorry.
his counsel mentioned a supply issue at the height of COVID. What would a master electrician following the code would have done instead of putting this arc fault breaker device or whatever it is? What would have been the proper step to have done?
They would have left it blanked off and waited, all right? So the wire would have been there until they got it, because Mr. DeSanto is not the only one. All the electricians have had this problem. It's been a big backlog, so you wait, you do what you gotta do. GFI outlets, you can do GFI breakers, you can do arc fault outlets, arc fault breakers, things that are needed. But, you don't turn the job over, you don't say, okay, it's not correct, it's not what the code requires, but it's good enough, you can live there, because then it's a safety issue. So if you ran the circuit, okay, that's fine. Cap it off, put a blank on it, leave it till you get the proper product. But on the Maple Street, it was not a supply issue because they called for an inspection, meaning we're complete on the job. The job was not complete. So there's violations there.
Mr. Paulson, if you'd like to.
I would like to just be clear. On the Maple Street job, the job was complete. Mr. Hoag saw outlets that were not arc fault protected, but the breakers were arc fault protected. The code requires one of the two. He saw the one that wasn't arc fault protected. So that's not a violation of the code. So that's one of his principal objections. The other was, as far as the apprentice work, he's not denying that he's responsible for that work. He tried to get it checked before Mr. Hoag got there, but Mr. Hoag, I understand, called to arrange the inspection. So it wasn't a matter he could call and cancel it. He got there at the same time. If he'd been there a half hour before, we wouldn't be here probably.
So, any other, Scott?
I guess I'm confused about dates. I just want to back up to the dates, to make sure I got the dates right. His original application was August 19th? Is that what you said?
The original license application.
2019 or something, but this year the license renewal was January 18th of
Right, but
2020.
then, what I'm getting at is because then he turned around and said 3 months later he hired an apprentice. If we were still in 2019 of August, that would have put it towards November when he hired the apprentice, and we still were not in COVID yet, so.
Yeah.
We're
this is where I'm
referring
getting
to the
confused.
January 18th, 2021 was the renewal for this most recent year where he said he had no employees. March of 2021, meaning 3 months after that, paperwork, that's the 3-month period. So
Back in 29, his original application, he had no employees, there was no issue.
no problem.
So the issue arises in January.
I'm sorry, Jill Paulson.
Okay, and you're an attorney as well?
Yes, I am.
And you're also representing?
Yes, I am.
The
Counsel for the respondent.
Okay, we hadn't gotten you on the record.
No worries.
Sorry about that.
Thanks, I was just, wanted to make sure I had the dates right.
Question, Scott?
Yep, that's.
All right. Do we have any other council members that would like to ask a question here? No.
Actually, I have
Yes,
one
go ahead.
clarification. Who did the work at Maple Street? Was it Mr. DeSanto or an employee? I'm sorry?
It was Mr. DeSanto.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And to the council's information there, I have a tester, and that was not correct. Not only was the outlet in the kitchen not GFI protected, nor GFI breakers, but nor was it arc fault protected. I have a tester that tests arc fault and GFI. It will trip either the outlet or the breaker in the panel, neither of which were there. As is the same as the Center Street job as well. And I was at the job on Center Street. Mr. DeSanto was not there. I had met a member of the properties management company there, but they had called to set up the appointment. So it wasn't like I beat him there, or it was a set appointment, right? And I believe our code says an apprentice shall work with, at all times, either a master electrician or a journeyman, not by himself.
Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to object to his introducing evidence. He had an hour and a half committee meeting in which he never brought this up. Now all of a sudden he knows the number, and we didn't hear any of that, or you didn't hear any of that in that hearing. I just think this post-hearing evidence is just not appropriate. Your council should decide, did the committee have at its meeting substantial evidence to warrant of finding of a willful violation? And then two, did they impose a proper punishment? And you were on to it, Mr. Carson. What is the standard? They could fine, they could put a note in his record. There are a lot of things they can do before they put a guy out of work. And if they really felt strongly, they should have taken some other step rather than
Very good, thank you.
the death penalty.
So, at this point, unless there are other questions from council, I would ask, do we have enough information, is everyone satisfied that they understand all the details as they've been presented here?
Just one
Go
more.
ahead.
So on Center Street, how many violations were found there? I got 3 for 58 Maple Street, and what is the number of Center Street?
There was multiple outlets, reverse polarity improperly wired. None of the new work in this apartment were arc fault protected, which were required. There were several violations there. I didn't even go through the rest of the job because I'd stopped the inspection at that point because we hit serious deficiencies.
Well, you had three at the hearing. You had three bad polarity outlets. Now, you subsequently said, oh, there were a dozen, but you originally, you and Mr. DeSanto talked about 3.
At least 3, I believe, is what I said in the meeting. And after that, and then found that there was no arc fault protection, which is also a requirement. I terminated the inspection at that point because it was a waste of my time to continue to count violations that were supposed to have been corrected by somebody who's supposed to be capable of correcting them.
That your violations was at the prior electrician.
All right, so I believe at this point, if we've heard
The
from
violations existed
everybody,
before I got
there
here, they
is,
didn't get fixed yet.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, is there something else?
I'm sorry.
Violations existed before, I'm sorry.
There was a prior electrician on the job.
No,
If I could intervene, this is why we're not having to.
Well, he's given that.
but none of this is factual.
I get it. I understand the frustration, and if you want to open it up, we can open it all up, but then he's going to say what he's going to say through you, because he's correcting the facts that you're stating were the facts,
Well,
and then Mr. Hogan's going to be able to have an
Yeah,
opportunity.
but he's talking about violations on the premises
I get
that had
it.
nothing to do with him.
Before me, I just didn't get a chance to fix it.
That's
We
incorrect.
know it has nothing to do with it, because he's testifying of it. See, we're running into
Okay,
problems.
I understand.
So, again, it appears that we've heard everything that one needs to hear. I think we all understand what we have heard. And then the question is, as I understand it, we have 60 days, am I correct? Or the council can
Up
decide
to
if they
60
have
days,
another.
we do it now, you do it anytime between now and 60 days.
Right. So we have as much as 60 days to think about it, to confer, and to render an opinion, or we could do that now, and I'll just, with the consensus of council, is this something you wanted to take the time on, or is this something that you want to take and resolve at this moment?
I would like to take a little bit more time with this.
Similarly, I see heads nodding, so with that, we're going to call this special meeting of the Common Council to, yes?
I'd just like to ask, what was the next step? At what point would we confer our decision?
At some point, the council will just go into executive session to discuss the.
I would hope you wouldn't use the full 60 days because
I would
it's
think we
losing
would.
work over
I
time.
would think we
It's
would.
an executive session.
So,
Could
yes.
I ask a couple of questions? I'm just wondering, how many employees that you oversee normally, and how long has the, Mr. DeSanto been an electrician here in Wilmington?
Go
Or
ahead.
how many years?
I have one employee,
One employee?
and I've been an electrician for 23 years.
Okay.
I've only been living in upstate New York for about 4 years, so maybe 4.5 years, something like that.
Okay.
Very good. We appreciate
I'm
your,
also a local IBW member for a long time, so I mean, this isn't my first.
we appreciate your time in front of us today, and I'll look for a motion to end this session of Common Council. Thank you very much, Luke. Do you have a second? Do?
If we could just, for technically, we'll be adjourning it for purpose of further consideration and then decision. We don't want to end it.
We are adjourning this.
Yeah.
For further consideration, not ending the discussion. But for this moment in time, this meeting of the Common Council is